Chinese millennials are becoming one of the central drivers, not just for the Chinese economy, but also for the world economy. This young generation grew up in a more open country with more information and influences from the outside world. They are the future decision makers in China. Zak Dychtwald is the founder and CEO of the Young China Group, a think tank and consultancy focused on China's emerging the identity on the world stage, as well as the evolving East and West millennials mindset. He is also the author of the critically acclaimed Young China, How the Restless Generation Will Change the Country and the World. We are delighted and honored to have him here today with us, and please join me to welcome him for the keynote speech. Thank you.
尊敬的各位领导、各位来宾、各位朋友，大家下午好。Esteemed leaders, valued guests, and friends, good afternoon. My name is Zak Dychtwald. I am the founder and CEO of the Young China Group. And the question I'd like to start with today is, how well equipped are you to understand Young China? When I say Young China, I actually mean two things. First, we're talking about young people. So I'm an American millennial. I was born in 1990. It feels like the entire world is obsessed with who we are, what do we stand for, what are we loyal to, who are we going to vote for, are we going to vote at all, what do we want to buy? There's about 80 million of us. There are 417 million millennials in China. That's 5 times more than we have here in the United States, and that's actually more people than we have in the United States and Canada combined. Young China, number one. The second definition of Young China is a little bit more interesting. It refers to an ancient culture reimagining its identity, redefining its identity on the world stage today. And that's happening right now. It's this young generation as well that's going to be the pathfinders for this new identity of China as it's defining itself today. First, who am I? I'm sure by now you guys have realized that I'm actually not Chinese. I'm actually born in Northern California. I first went to China in 2010. I was a student at Columbia. I was deciding where to study abroad. I figured I could go to Europe and study history, study the past, or go to China and see where everyone was saying the future was happening. I was a big science fiction fan, so it was a relatively easy decision. I went, traveled extensively throughout mainland, and realized very quickly that the China that was being described to me back home, the China in the media, was far different than the China I was seeing and experiencing. And I realized the fundamental difference is the difference between a people-forward version of China versus the other two Chinas that we often see in the media. On one hand, you have government, which is scary. On the other hand, you have a macroeconomy, which is exciting but inaccessible. Very few people actually talk about the people. And so in 2012, after graduating from Columbia, I moved to China. I was living in second-tier cities, trying to immerse myself, trying to get to the bottom of actual people, of youth culture there. 4 years later, St. Martin's Press was kind enough to publish Young China, came out a year ago, and that's why I'm here today. So thank you guys for your time. Today I'm going to talk about 5 different points in a relatively concise way. I'm trying to take us out of our seats here in LA. What do I mean by that? In China, on the internet, there's a really popular saying about a year or two ago, and that's, by the way, this is totally inappropriate to say at a business conference, so forgive me. It's 屁股决定脑袋. It means your butt determines your brain. Where you sit in the world, who's around you, the chatter you hear growing up, your view of the outside world, to a far greater degree than we'd like to admit ourselves, determines the way that we see the world. Now here in the United States, most of us are unwilling to switch seats, to take a seat in China and see the way that the world looks like from the perspective of Young China. So what I'm going to try to do today, and what I'm going to ask all of you to do today, is sort of suspend disbelief and imagine what the world looks like from a seat within China. Does that sound okay? Sure. 5 points. Here we go. The first one is, why should you care? The answer is impact. To help illustrate that point, tourism was just brought up, and I think that this is a really good way to imagine this. So as you can see by this graph, China is already the largest outbound tourism spender in the world. This is just one example, by the way. I want everyone to remember this graph. I'm going to come back to it in a second. Everyone sort of have this in mind? This doesn't really give an idea of what this actually means, though. Let's look at growth. You can see the other 4 contenders have had modest growth over the last decade, while China has grown by 765%. On top of that, 2/3 of all passport holders in China are millennials. What do these 3 slides mean? Well, you have one generation, single-handedly redefining the world of global travel. That's Chinese millennials, that's young China. By the way, for those of you guys interested in the tourism world, right now only 9% of China has a passport, 9%. That's a number that's expected to double in the next 5 years. 140 million more travelers traveling internationally. So the question, why should I care about young China? The answer is quite easy, it's impact. I don't care if you're interested in the international movie market, or why is it that when you bring your son or daughter to go see a movie, Shanghai is featured as prominently as New York or LA. I don't care if you're interested in the international real estate market, or why is it that the real estate around the UCLA is suddenly being bought up by so many Chinese nationals and prices are going up. This is not something that's far away and distant. This is going to impact every single one of you personally. Which brings me back to this graph. This is a smart crowd. What's wrong with this graph? It's not to scale. You'll notice that China is spends more than twice as much as the United States. And yet it looks like China's just edging out the United States. Could this be an error? Absolutely. But what I've noticed is that this graph and this error reflects a mentality outside of China, which is that we don't necessarily want this to happen. We're uncomfortable with this being true. Because most of the world understands the United States, Germany, the UK, France. We know what they like. In Germany, people eat their bread a little bit darker in the morning. But in general, those 4 markets are relatively the same. China represents a threat for those of us who have gotten used to the way that the world works. And most people aren't willing to reach out of their comfort zone and try to actually understand this young generation. And it's my hope through the work that I'm doing with Young China Group, but also through these sorts of interactions that everyone here is here for today, that we can lead through understanding. So I'm going to start that with point 2. China's generation gulfs. What do I mean by that? Everyone here knows how to say hello in Chinese, ni hao. After that, you'll say it's nice to meet you. Then you'll typically ask, where are you from? Northeast, southwest. I spent most of my time in Chengdu. Great. I would argue that it's a far more important question. Instead of where are you from, the question, when are you from? What do I mean by that? To sort of illustrate that, I'm going to bring my dad on stage. You guys clearly related. This is my dad in 1969. My dad in 1969 was making the decision of whether or not to go to Woodstock Music Festival. Does everyone know what Woodstock Music Festival is? Did anyone go to it? Smart, you guys aren't admitting that you were there. So Woodstock Music Festival was best known for 3 things: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. My dad was interested in probably 2 out of the 3. I'm not going to tell you which. You can know a lot about my dad just by this decision of whether or not to go to Woodstock, right? He probably had disposable income. He certainly had discretionary time. He probably had a friend with a car. He was probably rebelling against something, the war, or someone, his parents. You can tell a lot about my dad just by the decision of whether or not to go to Woodstock. United States, 1969. This is China in 1969. This generation was best known for their ability to 吃苦, to eat bitter, to do difficult things for long periods of time at the prospect of delayed gratification. This is the Cultural Revolution, by the way. I didn't choose this picture. Several historians from Beida, as well as someone from Guizhou, independently all sent me the same picture when I asked what did 1969 look like in China. I have friends in Guizhou province who describe their childhood having to eat tree bark to survive. I was born in 1990. My friends in Shanghai who were born in 1990, this is the Shanghai they knew. This is Shanghai in 2015. What is witnessing this level of change due to the way you see the world? What is witnessing this pace of growth due to your worldview? To sort of quantify that, so again, I was born in the United States, 1990. In my lifetime, I've watched our per capita GDP increase 2.5 times. So the basic, what does a life get you? 2.5 times better in my lifetime. That's really great. My friends born in China, in their lifetime, they've watched their per capita GDP, the basic quality of life, increase 27 times just in their lifetime. Maybe it's a developing economy thing. What about India? 5 times. Germany has a robust economy. What are they doing? 1.9. Brazil, 3.2. In fact, if you look at the top 70 performing economies of today, you'll notice that China is in a league of its own. When people talk to me about what does it mean, what does China's speed mean? This is what the rest of the world experiences. This is the pace we move at. This is the amount of change that most millennials all over the world have witnessed in their lifetime. And yet there's one country, there's one group of people who have witnessed growth that is unparalleled internationally. That is young China. What does that do to the way you see the world? So we talk a lot about generation gaps in the United States. We make a big deal, millennials and boomers, they're so different. We need entirely different marketing campaigns. This is the United States in 1969. This is the United States in 2015. It's Coachella. I think it's happening this weekend. I mean, it's different, but it's not that different. This is China in 1969. This is China today. By the way, these are your boomer consumers. These are your boomer travelers in China right now. So there's this massive generation shift, and one of the most exciting ones, I know this is a business conference, is a shift towards learning to play. The older generation was best known for eating bitter, for doing difficult things, delayed gratification, not delayed like, I'm going to work hard this semester and then my mom's going to get me a trip to Tijuana. No. This was delayed 5 years, 10 years, generations. I'm working hard today so that the next generation can have a better life. A major shift is this young generation wants to 活在当下, to live in the moment. In Chengdu, where I spent a lot of my time, we have a toast when we're eating 烤鱼 or 火锅, and that is 今朝有酒,今朝醉. It means today we have booze, so today we'll drink. We'll enjoy what we have now. That's a massive generation shift. The older generation was most interested in security and status. The younger generation is interested certainly in status, but also experience and fulfillment. A massive shift. Point number 3. When most of the world looks at China, they think of a nation behind a wall. And frankly, that used to be true. This is what childhood used to look like, right? I have friends in Chengdu whose parents and grandparents described to me the first time they saw the outside world. They remember going to a neighboring village and going to someone's apartment and seeing on the wall a 12-month calendar, Fields of Europe. That was it. That was the only view of the outside. The slogans of the time, 超英赶美, surpass England, catch up with America. Where was England? Where was America? People hadn't left the province, let alone the country. This is what childhood looks like today. I mean, this crowd knows better than anyone, but I often, when I talk to Americans about this, there's this idea that there's this sheltered generation who's never experienced the outside world. That might have been true years ago, but my friends in China have spent most of their life studying English. Many of them are studying abroad right now. They've grown up watching our movies, watching our TV shows, listening to our music, trying our fashion. I have friends who can quote Martin Luther King Jr. and Barney from How I Met Your Mother in the same sentence. There's a fluency in the outside world that, frankly, the outside world lacks in China. 1/3 of all students studying abroad in the United States right now are from China. 1 in 3. And there's a demographic element to this. It used to be in China that the demography sort of looked like a pyramid. You had a lot of kids, very few older people. And you can see that here, patriarch, matriarch, and all of their kids and all of their kids' kids surrounding them. There's a major shift that's happened that we all know about. It's called the 421 crisis, or problem or opportunity, depending on how you're looking at it. And that's China's demographic pyramid has turned itself upside down because of an incredible longevity revolution. Lifespan has gone from 40 in 1950 to 75 today. Incredible. And because of the one-child policy, China's demographic pyramid looks like this. What does that mean? Well, imagine this pyramid like a funnel. A funnel for love. A funnel for attention. A funnel for resources. By the way, how is it that all these young Chinese are traveling? It's not because they're making all the money themselves. It's because it's their parents' dream to go and see the outside world. It's their parents' dream that this younger generation no longer has to eat bitter like they did when they were growing up. And it's their parents' dream that this younger generation can 活在当下, can actually enjoy their life now. And by the way, one of the things we don't often talk about is this funnel is also an incredible funnel, an incredible siphon for pressure. This is one of the most pressured young generations in the world, and the reason is the same. The pressure to get into a good school, to get into the college market, the pressure on the job market, the pressure on the marriage market. You have 4 grandparents, 2 parents, all funneling their expectations on one child. This is one of the most pressured generations in the world, which, by the way, means they also want to break free of that pressure. A big way that that's done is travel. A big way that's done is reading. A big way that's done is education. A big way that's done is consumption. Point number 4, hyper-adaptive mindset. Everyone, I'm sure, recognizes WeChat. One of the most defining questions that we all ask ourselves, and in America, we kind of tell ourselves this as a bit of a reassurance, this question of, can young China be innovative? There's a reputation of China as being copycat China, not innovative. And many economists have decided that the most defining question for this young generation is, can they transition from being imitative to being innovative? I want to approach the question from a sort of different angle. And to do that, I'm going to use an old saying from Deng Xiaoping that he used to describe China's economy in the 1990s. It's 摸着石头过河. It means crossing the river by feeling the stones. It's a beautiful way of saying, we don't really know what we're doing. You know, our eyes are closed, we're feeling with one foot from one bank to the other, trying to get steady purchase, shifting our weight, and hoping we don't get swept downriver. Also expecting to have to adapt as we go. And that adaptive mindset, that willing to shift course as you go, is not just with the government, it's with all of the people. Dean Wu brought up the idea of disruption. This is a picture of one of the most seismic disruptions, industry-level disruptions in China today. This is Lao Yang. Lao Yang is a beggar, or Old Yang is a beggar outside of the Beijing subway system. And 4 years ago, Old Yang had his industry violently disrupted. Because Old Yang used to rely on what? He had a cup, he sat outside of the subway, and he relied on people's loose change, renminbi notes, being tossed into his cup. The problem is, 4 years ago, people in China stopped carrying money. So if your industry relies on loose change, what do? Well, you adapt. Old Yang went and got the cheapest smartphone he could. He printed out and laminated a QR code, and now when people leave the subway, they scan his QR code and drop change in his e-bucket, his phone. By the way, he has noted that there's actually been a spike in how much he gets, because when people have their entire wealth at their disposal, they give him 10 kwai instead of 3. Great for business. So a lot of the questions I ask when I'm here in America is, you have one person, Old Yang, who's adapted. Has your business adapted? Because this is the way that commerce looks in China right now. 2016, the United States spent 1 trillion renminbi through mobile. China spent 60. There's an entire way of doing business, of relating to money, of relating to vendors that exists in China that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And this adaptation mindset is not just the Jack Ma's of the world, wow, how am I going to innovate? How am I going to change the economy? It trickles down to the entire population, because this mentality of adaptation has translated to a mentality of adoption. You could have the best innovation in the world, but if you don't have anyone willing to try it, it doesn't mean anything. You have a culture of willing to adapt and adopt in China that exists there that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And so my question is not, can young China be innovative? Maybe we should be asking ourselves, can young China be adoptive and adaptive? I'm going to tell a quick WeChat story. I'm getting a little bit close on time here, but I'm going to tell a quick WeChat story. Everyone here has WeChat on their phones, I'm assuming? Yes? Does anyone here use it 4 hours a day or more? Raise your hand. Great. Okay, so if you don't use it 4 hours a day or more, then you are actually under average for millennials. So you guys maybe don't have a real idea of what WeChat can do. My sister's actually in the crowd today. Casey, can you wave? Thank you. This is the first time I've ever been able to speak in front of my sister. So can everyone give my sister a round of applause? Thank you. So say my sister is visiting me in Chengdu. She's here. I have a close friend, Vanessa, here, who's here as well. They're both visiting me in Chengdu. Just to give you an idea of what WeChat can do. What do people mean when they say super app? So we're talking over WeChat. I'm like, all right, there's this Kaoyu, there's this barbecue fish place that I can't wait to take you to. We're texting, it has normal text functionality. I'm going to call them, it has normal call functionality. We can video chat, it's got FaceTime and Skype functionality. Great, I still haven't left the app. What else can it do? So I am looking through different places that we can go. Yelp functionality. I'm going to send them the location. I still haven't left the app. I'm going to order them a Didi or an Uber equivalent within the app to make sure they get there okay. I'm going to look at for deals, sort of Groupon functionality. I'm kind of cheap. I want a cheaper version of the dinner tonight. So I'm going to look through the app. Okay, which of these restaurants have the best deals? I'm still in WeChat. We get there. I'm driving there because I want to have my car there. I actually book a parking spot outside of the restaurant. I still haven't left the app. We get there. I'm ordering entirely through the app. I don't have to talk to a waiter or a waitress. We're taking selfies. I'm posting it to my WeChat, my friend circle. By the way, at this moment, it's the only time that WeChat has acted like Instagram and Facebook as a social networking tool, just once. I pay through the app. I send them home through a Didi through the app. And then if I've had too much to drink, I'm ordering a daijia, someone who's going to come up on a scooter, who's going to drive my car and my drunk self back to my apartment so I don't have to drunk drive. I still haven't left the app. What in the United States can even touch this in terms of innovation? The last point, and I'm going to do it speedily, is the issue of pride. So a lot of the time when I post this picture, I will ask people what they think when they think of this. And especially if I'm doing a dinner panel and I'm in the United States, particularly not one of the big cities, people, if they've had a drink or two, will say brainwashed. I'm serious. And that really upsets me because it more or less discredits an entire 400 million person generation of the ability of autonomous thought. And usually I tell them a story. By the way, underneath this is the idea of this expectation that for China and for all countries in the world, as they modernize, they must westernize. Let's dig into that a little bit. So what's the story? My friend Wen Tao in Chengdu remembers the very first time he ever saw the outside world. And actually the United States. It was at the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. He remembers his mom tapping him on the shoulder and saying, Wen Tao, look, there's the United States. It's the strongest, most powerful country in the world. Wen Tao remembers going to his neighbor's house. They were watching on sort of a black and white TV, pretty clunky. And that year, the United States won 44 gold medals, and China won 16. You fast forward to 2008, Wen Tao is now 18 years old. Does everyone remember the Beijing Olympics, the opening ceremony? Broadly considered to be the greatest show ever put on by the human species. It's also China's coming out party, right? But instead of just coming out to the rest of the world, it was also coming out to China. Because people like Wen Tao's parents had this idea of China that was based in the past. China was not strong. China was the sick man of Asia. China was the Cultural Revolution China of their youth. So this version of China, modern, powerful, coordinated, was new to many people within China. That year, Wen Tao, now 18, remembers that China won 51 gold medals and the United States won 36. How much is a gold medal worth? I don't know, $1,000 on eBay, fine. What's the value of pride? This young generation feels that they've witnessed the greatest rags to riches story in the world. And the more time they spend outside, the more time they spend interacting with outside cultures, which their parents' generation were not able to do, this idea that for China, modernization should just equal westernization is being questioned, is being challenged, is being pushed. And so my question for everyone here and for the young leaders here today is, what is the mix? What does Easternization look like? What does westernization look like? If you were to write westernization in your Microsoft Word, you'd get a capital W. It's an idea that exists. If you were to write Easternization in your Microsoft Word, you'd get the red squiggly lines underneath it. It's seen as an error. My question for you is, what does it look like now that this young generation is having enough political and economic clout? What's the hybrid? What's the combination? What could Easternization and westernization look like? And my challenge for you and for everyone here today is to lead through understanding. Because at this moment, it feels like much of the world is not really interested in understanding China. And China, and especially this young generation, has spent much of its life doing its best to understand the rest of the world. It's my hope that, honestly, beginning with you guys, true ambassadors to this cross-cultural relationship, that we can lead this relationship through understanding. Thank you.